What are the main elements of critical thinking? We will elaborate on those elements with examples from the field of education. So first, critical thinking basically is a disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information. And this information generally is gathered from or collected through observations, through our experiences, through reflection on our experiences and observations, through reasoning, and through communication. The process of critical thinking generally involves the use of logic or reasoning. And the aim of this use of logic or reasoning is to identify strengths and weaknesses of alternative solutions to our problems or to the issues that come across in our daily life, in our professional life, or in our daily personal life. Generally, this leads to certain conclusions and to certain approaches to solving our problems. In the context of education, critical thinking is useful because it helps in empowering students and teachers and educational stakeholders to not only give information or absorb information, knowledge, and facts, but also to ask questions or to question that information, especially on the part of the students, to analyze the information that they get through the process of education and to apply the information that they get in a meaningful way and in a productive way. Now, what are generally the elements of critical thinking? The main elements of critical thinking include skepticism, analysis, evaluation, induction, deduction, clarity, accuracy, relevance, depth, breadth, objectivity, and humility. We will briefly describe these with examples from the field of education. So skepticism is very important as an element of critical thinking. What is it? It is basically the, you can say, the attitude and practice of questioning information before accepting that information or rejecting some information. So you need to question the authenticity and the relevance of the information. For example, when, there is a claim that homework aids to let's say, the academic achievement of students, or it helps in the educational process. So we need to verify this claim and the effectiveness of homework in the light of, you can say, empirical evidence, in the light of research. Without that, if we accept that, that means we are compromising on an important element of critical thinking, that is skepticism. Secondly, analysis. Generally, analysis is basically the process of breaking down information into components or into parts in order to understand it. So, for example, when we are analyzing a historical event, such as, for example, in the Pakistani context, the creation of Pakistan or the division of India, and we are analyzing its causes, so we have to break down the information and to analyze that part by part scientifically. And so when we are doing this, we are actually applying the process of analysis. Evaluation is an important element of critical thinking, which actually means making value judgment or judging the credibility of the information or the argument, the strength of the arguments and the weaknesses of the argument based on the data that is available. So when you are evaluating, you are basically assessing the sources and its reliability, the kind of research and then deciding. Induction is another important element of critical thinking, which actually means that we are drawing general conclusions from specific examples or specific observations or specific experiences. So when we are inferring, for example, the general conclusion related to a concept, a scientific concept called photosynthesis, we are basing this on our experiences or observations or on experiments that photosynthesis basically needs light. And so you can do this through empirical research or through observation. Now, the other important element of critical thinking is deduction, which is like the opposite of induction. In the case of deduction, we generally apply a general rule or a general theory to a particular example or to a particular situation. For example, we can make use of biological principles or theories in order to assess new species in the light of the theories that have already been established. Clarity is another element of critical thinking, and that actually means that critical thinkers need to think clearly and to communicate clearly and precisely the information that they get through experiences or through observations. So, for example, how can we clearly communicate? We can clearly communicate when the terms that we use in our communication, whether in written form or verbal form, the key terms in that communication or the key terms in, for example, in a written document such as in an essay should be clearly defined, and the key terms should have one definition rather than more than one definitions. Accuracy is another important element of critical thinking, which is basically ensuring factual correctness of the information on the basis of which we are making judgments. So verifying, for example, calculations in mathematics. So you calculate something on the basis of some formula, and then you need to verify that through empirically looking at that and assessing. And so you can say verifying calculation in mathematics in order to find the authenticity of our conclusion or of our answers. Relevance, again, is an important. We need to look for relevance. We need to focus on pertinent information or information that is relevant to the process of our analysis and conclusions. So again, for example, using data that is relevant to, for example, if we are looking at the school uniform in a debate whether schools should have a uniform or not, or what type of uniform should schools have, we need to support that with relevant data that we have got through empirical research. The other element of critical thinking is basically depth, or you can say going into the detail of things so that we can address complexities. In many cases, we accept certain information without going into the complexity or looking at it in detail from different perspectives. So, for example, if you are exploring the psychological motives of certain characters in, for example, in a drama or such as in Hamlet, you need to be looking at those characters and the way they are presented in this particular drama, in its all of their complexities, looking at those characters in a complex way. So going into the depth of things, again, you need to look critically and look at things through multiple perspectives. Breadth, on the other hand, is considering multiple perspectives, and so you are not just focusing on the depth, looking at things from a singular perspective, but you are looking at different perspectives related to an issue. For example, if you are looking at climate change from the scientific perspective, from policy level, and in terms of ethics, so now you are looking at the climate change in a multiple ways, and so there is the concept of breadth over there. So critical thinkers also look at things from multiple perspectives so that they can come up with authentic assessment and and knowledge. And lastly, objectivity is very important. What is that? That means that critical thinkers need to remain unbiased and fair. Their conclusions are based on empirical data and on authentic analysis of that data. So, for example, making the use of rubrics in order to fairly grade peer review work is an example of objectivity. Lastly, humility is very important for critical thinkers. They need to accept alternative views, alternative explanations, and they generally are not adamant on a particular, on understanding things in a particular way, or using just one model to understand certain things. So accepting alternative views and possibly giving way to other perspectives is also an important element of critical